We are this close to having built the world's first Dodge Demon truck. To make a short story even shorter, I bought this 2005 SRT10 truck after it was given up on by the previous owner, ripped out the Viper V10 and swapped in a 6.2 liter V8 out of a Dodge Demon. We've already completed the fuel system, we had a wild custom exhaust built for it, and hey, we even learned how to jack it properly. Probably could have phrased that better, but anyway. Once we got the engine and trans in place, it became immediately obvious that we just don't quite have enough shaft. Yep, just a couple inches too short. Now my original idea was to scrap this drive shaft entirely and build a one-piece unit, but the general consensus is, because this truck's so, well, dumb and big, that's not gonna work very well, so we're gonna have to modify just the front half of it. This is easily gonna be our most cost-effective option. Now, will it hold up to the abuse we're gonna throw at it? TBD. While they're building our drive shaft, there's just one more key piece to the transmission system that we need to figure out. And for this one, we actually have to get inside the truck, which is something we really haven't done much on this project yet, as is evidenced by all the trash that's still laying here. From the factory, these trucks came with a good old-fashioned column shifter. It's awesome for kicking your bare foot out the window and cruising down the road at 35 miles an hour, but for racing activities, like we'll be doing, not so great. Which is why we got ourselves this fancy new shifter from Motion Raceworks. It's exactly what we need on this build. It makes it virtually impossible to miss a gear, and we can add an air shifter later if we want. The good news is the floor's pretty flat right there, and also apparently filthy disgusting, so it shouldn't be too hard to make a pedestal to mount the shifter to. The bad news though, I gotta bust out the welder, which, well, this massive, thick, heavy piece of metal, that's gonna be our base plate right about there, and then we'll build two supports out of this square tube. Obviously we'll have to cut it down a little bit. Oh, perfect. Honestly, this thing turned out really nice. Now we are gonna have to take it back off at some point, pretty it up a bit. I do think that I wanna run these wires through one of these tubes once we figure out where they have to go. But pretty is definitely a problem for later. For now, just settle for functional. This next part, it probably goes without saying, but if you're taking on a project like this, if you're gonna mount something to the floor, the first thing you should probably do is pull back the carpet, make sure there's nothing obstructing you from doing so. It's not what I did, but you should. In these SRT10s, only the regular cabs came manual, yet our quad cab has the provision in the floorboard for a manual transmission. But what I think it is going to help us with is mounting our shifter. I think we're going to be able to use those rear two bolt holes on that plate for our front two mounting points on the shifter base. Oh, and we just got 52 cents back on this whole deal. The sheet metal under where we cut away was up just a little bit. We took care of that. And now, our shifter slides right in. Even with just the front bolted down, it's pretty solid. That's only gonna get better when we hit the back. Now, I am aware at this particular moment, it looks like I'm just drilling through the carpet blindly, but that's not completely the case. What we did was drill a hole through the carpet and through that plastic trans tunnel cover. That's where we're gonna run our shifter cable. The idea to run that cable through our manual shifter block off worked out perfectly. We are gonna put a grommet right there just to be safe, but it came out essentially exactly where we need it to. Before we attach our shifter cable, we gotta make one small adjustment to the transmission. We gotta ditch this flat shifter cable bracket and swap it with this offset one that's gonna match our shifter cable mount. We can get our shifter cable to our fancy new bracket here and at least loosely assemble it. Then we do our little cable end here. That's gonna slide into hole B for the 4L80. You good up there?
Yeah, we're good. 2, 3, 4, neutral, reverse.
First, second, third, fourth, neutral, reverse, and back to park. It feels good to me. If there's any more adjustability needed, that's probably something we'll have to do when the car's actually running and driving. Which, on that note, we're now one step closer to. Exciting for sure, but it's not going to be much fun to drive unless we can get this next system right. The day I decide to willingly build a 5,000-pound truck without power steering is the day you know I've officially breathed in too much brake clean. Luckily though, that day's not today. These SRT-10 trucks, they were built with hydraulic power steering systems, this one of the particularly leaky variety. The Demons though, they were built with an electric power steering system. In lieu of a power steering pump, they just have a little idler pulley to keep belt routing the same. This is one place where the Dodge engineers really didn't screw it up. These 3 holes are what mounts that idler pulley, and it just so happens to be the same 3 holes that mounts the power steering pump that you can find on older Hellcats. Meaning one quick trip to the dealership later, we got ourselves a brand new power steering pump off a 2015 Hellcat that's a direct bolt-on, leaving us with only the lines to fabricate. The lines though are where things usually get kinda complicated on swaps like this. From the factory, our hydraulic lines came out of the rack and ran through this big hydraulic radiator fan assembly that we since ditched. We're going to start with the low pressure side of the hydraulic system. This is part of the stock low pressure line that was straight until we put it in a vise and bent it. And even though we bent it, it's still hitting the AC compressor just a little bit. We'll fix that right up. Oh yeah, we got plenty of clearance now. Now theoretically, all we have to do is connect this nipple to that nipple. But being that I'd rather not boil the power steering fluid the first time we drive it, we're gonna stick a cooler in between. And lucky for us, the SRT-10s came with a power steering cooler. It's bolted right to the front of the radiator, and I don't see any reason why we can't just reuse that. Originally, it was these crusty old lines that went to the power steering cooler, and while we can't reuse all of it, we should be able to get away with using the front metal portion. The last thing we got to do on the low pressure side is simply clamp this hose onto that nipple. But before we do that, I want to take care of the high pressure side. And unlike what we just did, we can't just be clamping rubber hoses on the nipples and calling it a day. I had to make a mock-up line out of AN hose. I took that to the hydraulic fitting store and they duplicated it with this hose that won't explode under pressure. Up top, we had to do a little bit of zigzagging with a couple 90-degree fittings to set the power steering hose back and make sure it doesn't interfere with the radiator hose we're about to install in a few minutes. But with that, we can clamp our last low pressure line down, and then we get to hop back into the bed full of junk, which I do have to say is probably my favorite part about building a truck for the first time, and cross one more system off the list. Well, we would if we didn't have a defective paint pen. But wait, there's more, and there really wasn't supposed to be more. Almost there. I don't know. This truck is really the gift that just keeps on giving. All right, back to serious business. Now, I know we've completed most of the cooling system, but there is just one very large, gaping, wide open hole we've yet to fill. Now, you might be wondering how we're gonna fill such a big hole. Well, we're gonna do it by dumpster diving. Now, if you've ever thought my shop looks like a junkyard, it's because it's a junkyard. Which naturally means we have a lot of junk. So when it came time to replace the big clunky hydraulic fan that we took off the SRT-10, I started looking through our scrap radiator fan bin and found this guy. It's a fan assembly off a 2009 Cadillac CTS-V, and it turns out, mounted vertically, it's almost a perfect fit. Unfortunately though, it was in the scrap bin for a reason. This car got hit in the front and it blasted part of the radiator shroud apart, so we're not going to be able to use this one. I was, however, able to find a direct aftermarket bolt-on replacement for the CTS-V. But hey, this one's a lot lighter, slimmer, and better looking anyway, so I think it's a couple $100 well spent. It already covers the hole our old radiator fan left pretty perfectly. We're just gonna have to do a little bit of modification to the aluminum shroud, a lot of modification to the plastic shroud. We should have ourselves a really clean and easy fan setup. Yeah, the irony of buying a direct fit radiator shroud and cutting everything off it, making it basically just a piece of sheet metal, is definitely not lost on me. We might have had to grind and cut away half our original radiator shroud, which is now just dust on the floor, but I'm digging the way this came out. We have these little flappy boys for aerodynamic purposes. It sits really nice and flush. All in all, I think this is about the cleanest possible way we could have done this whole thing. As long as it fits down in here. All right, it fits. Yes, the cleanest possible way we could have done this. Personally, I think it looks even cooler now that we got it in the car. The fins stick out I don't know, maybe an inch past the radiator shroud. The whole thing's super low profile, so we still have a good bit of space between the engine and the radiator to do something with at some point. With the fans done, that leaves us only 2 more things to take care of on the cooling system, one of which is super easy, the coolant overflow tank. A bracket, a hose, done. This next part though, it's not gonna be quite as simple. We need to connect this to this. And when you're building radiator hoses for a swap application like this, you really have 2 or 3 options. Number 1, you can go to the auto parts store and try to find a radiator hose off some other car that's close enough to what you need that you might be able to get it to work. Number 2, you can buy a bunch of pre-made aluminum bins, cut them and weld them to make exactly what you need. Or number 3, you can buy a big straight piece of aluminum tubing, a pipe bender, and try to bend what you need into place without having to do any cutting or any welding. Now don't get me wrong, this method does have its own set of issues. This was our first test piece and everything looked pretty decent until we turned it over and it's kinked like you would get at a cheap muffler shop. This aluminum's so thin and so soft, it just crumbles. Now we could avoid that by buying a really expensive mandrel bender, but best I can do is a bucket of wet sand.
Look at that.
If this doesn't work, we're just gonna look like idiots covered in sand. But if it does work, we'll look like idiots covered in sand, but we'll have one good radiator hose. The idea here is that all this sand we put in is gonna make this bin like a much thicker piece of metal and therefore not crush. Oh, it's also way harder to bend.
That's a good sign.
Yes, very good sign. Oh, it's way less kinked. It is way less kinked. Not perfect, but much better. That's 10 times better. This is our before piece, and it's pretty well crushed. And here's the after. There's little indentations, but by any metric, I'm calling this a huge win. So I'm not gonna go quite as far to say these things actually look good, but from a first time bending radiator hose out of one single solid piece of straight aluminum, I don't think they look bad, and most importantly, they're gonna work perfectly. On this build though, despite what the paint might say at this particular moment, looking okay really isn't good enough. So I do have one idea, an idea in fact that I got from the Demon that I think we can apply here to make these look a little better. This fancy stuff's called TechFlex, and while generally it is meant for wiring, this is their high temperature version. It's rated to almost 260 degrees Fahrenheit. Basically, if this stuff melts, we have far bigger issues to worry about. But when we slide it over our piping here, I think it makes up for our deficiencies in the fabrication department quite well. A little bit of wrap, a quick B-roll, and a few clamps later, we're done with the cooling system. But before we head up to the roof, let me whip something out for you guys. Check her out. It's a full carbon fiber intake made by Legmaker specifically for the Hellcats. While we can't use the airbox or any of the heat shielding that comes with the Hellcat kits, the intake tube itself's perfect for this project. Not only is this one of the easiest things we've done on the truck to date, but it looks sick. We got like 2 millimeters of clearance there. We got like 2 millimeters of clearance there on our overflow tank. Maybe we measured really carefully, or maybe we just got really lucky. I'll let you guys decide which one of the two it is. My original plan for the intake on the truck was to really go full Demon mode with it and rig up some elaborate system that drew in air through the hood scoop and fed it to some type of airbox, but the more I laid it out, the more it just seemed dumb and inefficient. And more importantly, I think I just found a better way to do things. Turns out, sometimes the easier way ain't so bad. That'll give us all the fresh air we could ever want without any of the fancy hood contraptions. All week we've been talking about the stuff in the engine bay, but let's take a second to focus on what's not in the engine bay anymore. Right about here is where our battery came from the factory on this truck, but I decided to rip it out, ditch the whole big battery tray assembly, which cleaned up our engine bay a lot, but it also means we can no longer mount a battery up here. So that only leaves us a few options. We could mount it in the bed, but that's where I like to keep my junk, and I don't really intend on changing that. So what we're gonna do is take this not so fancy bracket the new guy Tim did some welding on already, mount it upside down underneath the car, and stick the battery in that. If you think that part sounds sketchy, don't worry, the next part is far, far worse. How are we looking on the measurement side of things?
So it's a little bit tight. Our tray measures 1 foot exactly, and our battery measures 1 foot and a half inch.
So correct me if I'm wrong, that is not going to fit in that.
That's correct.
We can make it though.
Yes, we can.
Oh yeah. Check it out, like a glove. They say taking a saw to a battery is a bad idea. Know what they're talking about. As for where we're gonna mount this thing under here, we're gonna take a page out of the Dodge Viper book, which is very fitting on this truck. And we're gonna mount it down low, right about there. Yeah, it turns out the most Viper thing about my Dodge Viper truck is the battery location. Now, we can do what we're about to do for one reason and one reason only, and it's because we bought an awesome battery. This is my first time using the anti-gravity battery, or any lithium-ion battery for that matter, and this is unreal. 19 pounds. For comparison's sake, I have a normal battery that is actually a smaller series. 47 pounds. You work out. You said you work out a little bit?
A little.
Unreal. Wow. If the UPS guy can do it, you guys can do it too. The whole weight thing, that's cool and all, but you can mount them in any orientation, which in this case is quite critical. I don't think this would be very much fun with any other type of battery.
Not a chance.
Boom. Ultralight, out of the way. The little weight that it does have is back behind the axle. Muy bien. I apologize. Fernando's been on vacation for a week. He said I had to drop Spanish in here somewhere.
Is it running yet?
Long time no see.
Oh,
It's sort of, almost, kind of there.
I was having higher expectations, to be honest with you.
Than this? No, we made great progress. Stop it. Stop it. Hey, question for you. Think of any shaft jokes while you were out?
Really? It's too early for that.
Obviously, you guys knew what was coming. That was my ultra super slick segue into the fact that we got the drive shaft back. And as long as we measured right, it should fit right up if we can handle this big, you know what? Yeah. Not only did they give us some extra length, they refreshed pretty much everything, including all of our U-joints.
How long do you think it's going to take you to destroy this shaft?
So that is a genuine concern. Keep in mind, they modified our drive shaft, they made it work, but it's still a stock drive shaft. So I don't know how it's gonna hold up. It could very well break the first time we take it to the drag strip, but I guess it's a bridge we'll cross when we come to it. We might, however, have a fighting shot because in addition to the U-joints, they replaced the carrier bearing. Everything that was serviceable in this drive shaft, they serviced. Most importantly, we found out we can actually measure things properly. The drive shaft fits perfectly. You do want a little bit of space there for when things are moving around, when the drive shaft compresses. You want some space to slide in and out, and we nailed it. There is one shaft, though, that we definitely didn't nail. There's, how do I put this? Been a bit of an oversight. These Demon engines, along with the Hellcats, use variable valve timing. Now, typically, that's controlled by the stock ECU, but we're not going to be using the stock ECU. We're going to run the truck on this Holley Dominator, which unfortunately can't control VVT, even though Holley's supposedly lower-end Terminator X can. I have no idea why. This really only left us with two options. We could order this $100 VVT delete and call it a day, or we could go full, you know, while we're in there mode and order a hog-ass cam for it, which was the whole shaft reference. I know it took me a minute to get there. After all, if we're going through the trouble of ripping the entire front of this engine apart, which would have been 10 times easier when it was out of the car, might as well make it worth it. I guess this is kind of a one step back, two steps forward type deal. Now, I've done a ton of cams on LS's. This part, though, is where things start to feel a little foreign. I've never been, well, I was going to say I've never been into one of these, but I guess I kind of have now. This is a massive timing cover. It's like 5 times the size of an LS one. That aside, though, they are more similar than they are different. This VVT cam gear kind of just looks like the cam gear on an L99, which is the displacement on demand version of an LS3. It's this cam phaser that we're going to have to do a little bit of modification to so we can delete our VVT. We're going to bust it open with this tool and use this little pin to secure it in place.
You say secure?
I said secure.
We're doing the thing?
Seems like a good time. Having everything on your new project truck secure, that's good. Staying secure while you're browsing online, though, that's probably even more important. Thankfully, it's never been easier thanks to the sponsor of today's video, NordVPN. Maybe you're looking to protect your family when they use the internet at home, or maybe you, like me, travel a lot and you're connecting to a lot of, say, airport Wi-Fi networks. Either way, NordVPN puts you in total control of protecting your online identity. Or hey, maybe security's not even your concern. Let's say, theoretically, you took a trip to rural Serbia and when you're there, you tried to go shopping online for parts for a certain beautiful red truck. Yeah, turns out when you're connected to Serbian Wi-Fi, you don't see any of the same search results. But if we scroll on back over to the States and connect to a server in, let's say, Miami, we can buy all the parts we want. Whatever your reason to use NordVPN might be, right now you can get a 2-year plan at a huge discount and 4 additional months free when you use my link nordvpn.com/scraplifeleague. This is the best deal NordVPN offers, and if that's still not enough, it's completely risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Remember, that's nordvpn.com/scraplifeleague for a smoking deal on a 2-year plan and 4 months free. When the VVT system's working as it should on these Hellcat engines, they use a little solenoid that's just above the water pump to regulate oil pressure and move these little metal veins around inside this cavity to either advance or retard timing. But what we're gonna do is drop this little pin into here, mechanically locking the system in place so it can't move regardless of whether it has oil pressure going to it. With that squared away, if I was the type of person that could just leave stuff alone, we could slap it back together and be on our way. That's not me, never been me, probably never will be me, so we get to keep ripping stuff apart. Here's the part where things can go south in a hurry. We're gonna try to swap these cams the easy way by not pulling the cylinder heads. That only works if the lifters stay up in their bores. If they fall, we're screwed, we gotta pull the heads. So what we're gonna do is spin this camshaft over a bunch to have the lifters ride up in their bores. Tim's gonna pull this thing out, and I'm gonna jam my shaft in as fast as possible before they fall back down. There you go. As long as we don't hear some weird clink, things are going all right. Even though I probably just jinxed us. One more, baby. Oh, we did it. I guess this is one of the more important torque specs when they stuck 2 cards in with the cam. 90 foot-pounds. Now, before we completely finish up the camshaft job, there's one more shaft we have to take care of. This is our original crank pulley, and this is our new 10% bigger crank pulley. This larger 10 rib section's for the belt that runs our supercharger, and with this one being just a bit bigger in diameter, for every rotation of this, we're gonna spin the supercharger 10% more. This gets us 2 things. More boost, more power. There's really nothing else you could want out of a car. But before we install that, there's just one more thing we have to do, and full disclosure, it's possibly my least favorite thing to do on any car build. On our stock crank pulley, where it mates to the crankshaft, there's no keyway, there's no alignment pin, nothing. It's the same deal with the crank. There's nothing keeping this pulley aligned except a really tight press fit. When you're up in the boost, when you're really stressing an engine like this, crank pulleys with this design, with no keyway, with nothing locking it in place, they can slip, the crank pulley can spin on the crank, but on our new dampener, it does have a provision for a keyway. That doesn't do us much good unless the crankshaft has a keyway to go into that provision. So what we're gonna do here is drill our own. Pinning your crank like this is something you should do on any modified supercharged car that didn't have a keyway from the factory, and doing it without the right tools is downright terrifying. Luckily though, for the Hellcats, ATI makes a crank pinning kit that makes this essentially foolproof. Here is the pin we're gonna put into it that I definitely am not going to drop into the front main seal type area. There we go. We got to hammer it in a little bit. We should be good to go.
How many pounds we need for that?
Well, that's 82.6 yard pounds.
It's not a conversion. I feel sorry for the people watching in the UK and anywhere else in the world right now. Yeah, so what you probably shouldn't do is slip off that bolt. All right. Let me just slide this way a little bit.
Why are you scared?
All right. We're good. We're good. Yeah, let's find a different way to brace this flywheel. All right, she's torqued down, no major incidents, but because this is 10% bigger, the pulley itself is rubbing on the AC bracket, which is part of the timing cover, so we're going to have to get to hacking on that. It's also really, really close to the sway bar. Now that we have this being close to the sway bar and this, I think we're going to go ahead and drop the sway bar down a 1/4 inch a little bit later. That way we don't have to worry about anything smashing into the sway bar once we get this thing on the road. Which is an idea I have to credit a lot of you guys with. When you saw how close that oil filter was to the sway bar last episode, a lot of you guys mentioned that instead of switching to a smaller oil filter, I should just space the sway bar down. And honestly, it's not something I thought of. We got our cam done for more chop. We got our crank pulley done for more boost. Now the next thing we got to check off the list is something that's absolutely 110% critical if you're doing an aftermarket cam like this. A new set of much stiffer valve springs. When you install a more aggressive camshaft, one of the things it's going to have is more lift, meaning these lobes are going to be higher. In turn, when the cam spins, that'll make the push rods come up just a little bit higher than stock, tilt the rocker arm down just a little further than stock, and open our valve, you guessed it, further than stock. It's great for power, great for airflow, but terrible for your stock valve springs. Not only can it cause your valves to float and not close completely at high RPM, it can straight up break your stock valve spring, which is exactly why we're changing to these very stiff ones. Now, normally when we do valve spring installs, we do it the cylinder head off the car. It's cake. We're not pulling the heads on this, so we had to find a way to make sure the valves don't fall into the engine when we pull the spring off. We're gonna do that with compressed air. Now the idea is that once we put this very fancy new valve spring removal tool on and crank it down. Before I even finish my thought there, pro tip, if you're doing this, these valve locks, super easy to lose, and in this case, drop right into your engine. Be very careful, use a magnet. Now, what was I saying? And pull our valve spring off, the valve's gonna act just like it would if it was sitting face down on a table. One other piece we're gonna change, the stock valve springs, this is the retainer that goes on top of it, the valve lock's sitting there. We're not using that. We're gonna use these fancy new titanium ones. Now that we got our springs and retainers done, there's one test we have to do, and I should note that if we fail this test, things are gonna go very, very poorly. But when you install a new set of springs and retainers like this, you wanna give all of them a tap with a rubber mallet. The purpose of that is that if any of these valve locks aren't fully seated, the minute you smack it with a hammer, they're gonna go shooting out somewhere. I don't know, you'll probably lose them. The valve's gonna fall down into the engine. Will it be a nightmare? Yes, but better now than when you start the engine for the first time. This does get a little more complex if you're pulling your cylinder heads. If you're having them decked, then you have to use a push rod measuring tool like this in order to custom size push rods. But since we just did a cam kit, we get to take the easy route, skip the measuring, and install these push rods that were part of the cam kit from Flying Ryan Performance. And now, it's time, officially, for the last shaft of the day, the rocker shaft. I know we've had a plethora of shafts in this episode. This is a tricky shaft. Now these rocker shafts have a really, really strange torque sequence. In fact, I can't remember it off the top of my head, so we're gonna read it to you right off the manual. Snug to 7 foot-pounds, okay. Torque to 17 foot-pounds, all right. Individually loosen by half a turn, then retorque to 17 foot-pounds. All right, that makes sense. Finally, give it another 30 degrees. Oh, and then do the whole thing over multiple times to ensure they're seated. You want to do the honors?
I suppose.
Go for it. Nothing's shooting out. The valves aren't hitting the pistons. It's not locked up. You look concerned, though.
What about the first gun? Boom! I don't know, just saying. Are you guys 100% sure that they did everything right? Yes? No? What?
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of starting it, I'm hoping, both fingers crossed, that next episode we're able to start this thing. I know we have a lot of reassembly to do, but after that, it's really just wiring the entire truck, and it should run.
Just wiring the entire truck.
We're going to keep cranking on it, so hopefully I'll see you guys back here soon, and maybe, just maybe, once again, still fingers crossed, we can start it. Whoa, 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 whoa! Hop into the bed full of... I'm going to f***ing bust my trying to get this shot, but I think... Give it a go. It's
You know how many times we're actually gonna say that everything's gonna go smooth and they go crazy
how
south?
many times we've already done that today.